We turn now to that growing feud between R&B legends Anita Baker and Babyface. Baker saying she's dropping Babyface as an opening act on her tour because of online threats from his fans.
We had great relationship.
Okay.
My relationship with Anita has been fine. I don't fight people. I don't. We don't go at it. You know, we're very, very nice to each other.
At 67, Anita Baker finally named the men she hated most in the music industry. From Luther Vandross, who needed his own toilet seat to avoid her.
You gotta be allowed your expression. You know what I'm saying? You don't tell Picasso not to use blue when he's in his blue period.
To Babyface, who sued her for $250,000.
Baker has removed Babyface from her tour.
Come on now.
After several days of criticizing him on Twitter.
That don't seem wrong to y'all? Something don't seem wrong about that? Like, he didn't do anything.
And even record executives made her fight for her own music.
It was very difficult in some ways because nothing I ever wrote sounded like anything anybody wanted to hear at that time.
Behind the velvet voice that made Sweet Love a timeless classic lived a woman who refused to be controlled, manipulated, or silenced by the men who tried to own her. To understand how Anita Baker became the industry's most dangerous woman, you have to go back to where it all began, with the men who thought they could break her. December 1988, Boston Garden. Two of R&B's biggest stars were supposed to be celebrating their sold-out Heat Tour, but backstage, a Cold War was raging that would expose the ugly reality behind the music industry's most successful partnerships.
And I can't sleep at all. I'm so tired.
Animosity between singers Anita Baker and Luther Vandross, now touring nationally, prompted separate stages and special backstage curtains at the Boston Garden to totally separate their entourages. The tensions had become so toxic that Vandross brought in his own personal toilet seat, rather than use the weathered oval fixtures at the 60-year-old venue. What should have been a celebration of black excellence had become a masterclass in ego warfare. Curtains were reportedly erected so Baker and Vandross could walk around backstage without having to see each other. Baker's guest list tickets were placed in one section, Vandross's tickets in another section, ensuring their fan bases wouldn't even mix in the audience. The problems had been building since the tour's inception. Both artists were at the peak of their powers. Baker's Giving You the Best That I Got had just hit #1 on the Billboard pop chart.
Ain't there something I can give?
While Vandross's Any Love was climbing the charts. But success only amplified the personality conflicts that were destroying their professional relationship. Baker's reputation as a perfectionist was already legendary in the industry. During a show at New York's Madison Square Garden, she stopped cold in the middle of one number to berate her production crew and band for what she considered inferior sound quality. As audience members watched in shock, Baker publicly humiliated her employees before 20,000 onlookers, turning what should have been a musical performance into a display of unchecked ego. But Luther wasn't backing down. The veteran performer had his own ideas about how the tour should run, and he wasn't interested in accommodating Baker's demands for special treatment. The clash between two artists who both demanded absolute control created an environment so hostile that their management teams had to coordinate separate arrival times and backstage areas.
Yeah, it's bothersome right now that you're asking me. It's bothersome because I don't enjoy talking about it a lot.
The media had a field day with the conflict. Critics noted that while both artists specialized in romantic ballads, you can be sure of one thing: they're not singing these love songs to each other. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Two performers whose music was built on themes of love and connection couldn't stand to be in the same room. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, the tour was a massive commercial success, selling out arenas across the country. but the professional damage was irreversible. Luther Vandross's comments on the Oprah Winfrey Show implying that he and Baker were in conflict during their 1988 tour cemented Baker's reputation as a difficult performer in the eyes of the industry. Years later, Baker would defend the tour's success, tweeting that, "Mr. Vandross and I were one of the most successful R&B/pop sold-out arena concert tours of its time. We created joy, jobs, and commerce for our community. As successful business partners often do, we had disagreements. We also had joy. But the damage was done." The Luther Vandross feud established a pattern that would follow Baker throughout her career. Brilliant performances overshadowed by backstage conflicts that exposed the darker side of her perfectionist personality. April 2006. Los Angeles Superior Court. Kenneth "Babyface" Edmonds, one of the most successful producers in R&B history, was filing a breach of contract lawsuit against Anita Baker for $250,000. The man who had crafted hits for Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and Mary J. Blige was about to expose the business practices that had made Baker one of the industry's most feared collaborators. The lawsuit revealed the ugly details of Baker's 2004 collaboration with Babyface on her album My Everything.
Feel a warm breeze blowing down through the trees.
According to court documents, Baker had broken 2 oral agreements with Edmonds, who co-wrote, produced, and performed on the song Like You Used to Do. The first betrayal involved producers' royalties. Baker allegedly refused to pay Edmonds at least $100,000 from an estimated 500,000 albums sold. But the financial dispute was just the beginning. Babyface also alleged that he and Baker had an agreement to play 4 concerts together in July 2005. But Baker canceled 2 shows and refused to pay $150,000 for those dates. For a producer of Babyface's stature, being stiffed on contracted performances was both a financial and professional humiliation.
Well, Anita Baker is still maintaining that she knew absolutely nothing about this civil lawsuit that prompted the bench warrant. That's why just moments ago, here at Circuit Court, her attorney filed a motion to fight what he's calling a money grab.
The lawsuit exposed the predatory business practices that had become Baker's signature. Industry insiders explained that artists typically work with producers on handshake agreements, making albums first and handling paperwork later. Baker had exploited this industry custom, agreeing to terms verbally and then refusing to honor them when payment came due. The case dragged on for years, creating a cloud of suspicion around Baker's business dealings. In an industry built on relationships and reputation, being known as someone who didn't pay her collaborators was career poison. The message was clear: work with Anita Baker at your own financial risk. Fast forward to 2023, and history was repeating itself. During Baker's Songstress tour, Babyface was scheduled to open for her at the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. But on the night of the show, fans who had paid to see both artists were informed that Babyface would not be performing. The official explanation cited technical difficulties, but the real story was more complex.
We turn now to that growing feud between R&B legends Anita Baker and Babyface. Baker saying she's dropping Babyface as an opening act on her tour because of online threats from his fans.
Babyface released a statement apologizing to fans and explaining that he had been asked not to perform to give Baker space and time for her full show. The diplomatic language couldn't hide the humiliation of being publicly excluded from a performance he was contracted to deliver. The incident reignited old rumors about Baker's inability to share stages with other major talents. Social media erupted with fans demanding refunds and questioning Baker's professionalism. The woman who had once sued record labels for millions was now being accused of sabotaging her own tour partners. Baker's response revealed the same defensive pattern that had characterized her conflicts for decades. Instead of taking responsibility, she blamed everyone else, Live Nation, technical issues, and eventually Babyface's fans themselves. She took to social media calling his supporters online bullies and demanding he control his fan base. The final insult came when Baker announced she was removing Babyface from the remaining tour dates entirely. She claimed to be enduring cyberbullying and threats of violence from his fan base, stating she would continue the tour alone for personal safety reasons. The Babyface saga revealed the toxic pattern that had defined Baker's career. Brilliance undermined by an inability to maintain professional relationships with equally talented artists. March 2021. In the middle of a global pandemic, 63-year-old Anita Baker declared war on the music industry itself. Her target, Elektra Records and Warner Music Group, the corporate giants who had profited from her genius for over 3 decades while denying her the basic right to own her own music. Baker announced that she had outlived all of her artist contracts and that the labels no longer owned her name and likeness. Under copyright law, 30-year-old masters were to be returned to her, but she prepared for a fight when the labels resisted. The battle was deeply personal. Baker was invoking the 1976 Copyright Revision Act, which allows artists to reclaim their master recordings 35 years after they were first released. But Elektra Records wasn't going to give up their cash cow without a fight. These weren't just recordings, they were the masters to Rapture, Giving You the Best That I Got, Sweet Love, and Caught Up in the Rapture, songs that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue. Baker's nuclear response shocked the industry. She asked her fans to stop buying and streaming her music entirely, essentially declaring an economic boycott against her own catalog. She urged supporters not to purchase or promote her music, willing to sacrifice her own income to pressure the label into compliance. The streaming economics Baker revealed exposed the industry's exploitation. She disclosed that 2020 streaming rates paid artists between 0.3 and 0.5 of a penny per stream, minus various fees and taxes. After selling millions of albums, Baker was earning fractions of pennies while corporate executives collected millions. But this wasn't just about money. It was about artistic legacy and family inheritance. Baker expressed hope that all artists could receive fair compensation from streaming, calling the current rate of a fraction of a penny per unit soul-crushing. She understood that without her masters, her children would never truly inherit her life's work. The label executives had underestimated Baker's resolve. While other artists had fought these battles quietly through lawyers, Baker was conducting a public relations war, using social media to expose the industry's predatory practices. She referenced Prince, who had famously protested similar treatment, and echoed his refusal to allow his music on platforms that didn't compensate artists fairly. The war lasted months, but Baker's strategy worked. By September 2021, she announced victory, declaring that all her children were coming home, and that impossible things happen every single day. The image she shared showed her first 5 albums: The Songstress, Rapture, Giving You the Best That I Got, Compositions, and Rhythm of Love, finally under her control. The Elektra Records battle established Baker as more than just a singer. She had become a warrior for artists' rights, willing to sacrifice short-term profits for long-term justice. Her victory opened the door for other legacy artists to reclaim their own masters, fundamentally shifting the power dynamic between artists and labels. But the war had revealed something darker about Baker's personality, a willingness to destroy relationships and burn bridges to get what she wanted, regardless of the collateral damage to business partners, fans, or industry relationships. Behind every public battle, there was a private war that cut deeper than any industry feud. Walter Bridgforth Jr., IBM marketing specialist and Baker's husband of over 2 decades, had watched his wife transform from the woman he married in 1988 into someone consumed by control and conflict. The marriage had begun at the height of Baker's career. Fresh off the success of Rapture, and in the middle of recording Giving You the Best That I Got, Baker seemed to have everything: critical acclaim, commercial success, and a stable relationship with a man who understood the business world.
I'm giving you the best that I've got.
Bridgforth brought a different perspective to Baker's life, grounding her in corporate discipline while supporting her artistic ambitions. But success changed everything. As Baker's career exploded, so did her demands for control over every aspect of her professional life. The perfectionist tendencies that had always driven her music began consuming her personal relationships. The woman who stopped concerts to berate sound technicians brought that same uncompromising attitude home. The couple's 1989 miscarriage was a turning point that exposed the fragility beneath Baker's tough exterior. The trauma was made worse by widespread media coverage that forced Baker and Bridgforth to retreat to Maui, Hawaii, for several weeks to heal away from public scrutiny. But even private grief became public spectacle in Baker's world. Bridgforth found himself managing not just a wife, but a brand that demanded constant vigilance and control. Baker's reputation for being difficult affected every aspect of their social and professional lives. Industry events became minefields where the wrong interaction could trigger another public feud or business conflict. The birth of their two sons, Walter Baker Bridgforth in January 1993 and Edward Carlton Bridgforth in May 1994, should have brought joy and stability. Instead, it added new pressure to an already strained relationship. Baker's determination to control her professional legacy extended to fierce protection of her family's privacy, creating an environment of constant surveillance and suspicion. As Baker's battles with record labels, tour partners, and industry executives escalated throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Bridgforth found himself increasingly isolated. Supporting Baker meant choosing sides in conflicts that often had no clear heroes or villains, just damaged relationships and burned bridges. The final years of the marriage coincided with Baker's most aggressive legal battles.
Winning singer Anita Baker is being accused again of not paying her bills. This time it's her own lawyer who wants to drag her into court.
The 2006 Babyface lawsuit, ongoing disputes with record labels, and Baker's growing reputation for business conflicts created a toxic environment that affected every aspect of their family life. Bridgforth, who had built his career on corporate diplomacy and relationship management, watched his wife systematically destroy the professional networks that had supported their lifestyle. While Baker never publicly discussed the end of her marriage, the timeline suggests that Bridgforth's departure coincided with her most destructive period of industry warfare. The man who had witnessed her transformation from rising star to industry pariah finally reached his breaking point. The divorce revealed the human cost of Baker's uncompromising approach to business and creative control. In her quest to own her music and control her legacy, she had lost the partnership that had sustained her through her most successful years. In 1983, before there was Elektra, before there was Warner Music Group, there was Beverly GLen Records, the small independent label that discovered Anita Baker and created the blueprint for decades of exploitation that would fuel her rage against the music industry. Beverly GLen was run by Otis Smith, a former Motown executive who promised Baker the artistic freedom and respect she had never received from major labels. But Smith's promises were built on industry-standard contracts that heavily favored the label over the artist. Baker's debut album, The Songstress, was recorded under an agreement that gave Beverly GLen ownership of her masters and control over her career direction. The album was a critical success but a commercial disappointment, selling modestly and failing to establish Baker as a major force in R&B. More importantly, it established the pattern of contractual exploitation that would haunt Baker for the rest of her career. Smith and Beverly GLen owned her recordings, her name, and effectively her artistic identity. When the album failed to generate significant profits, Beverly GLen began pressuring Baker to change her sound, her image, and her artistic vision.
It was very difficult in some ways because nothing I ever wrote sounded like anything anybody wanted to hear at that time.
Smith wanted a more commercial approach that would appeal to mainstream radio and crossover audiences. Baker, who had spent years developing her sophisticated jazz-influenced style, was being asked to compromise everything that made her unique. The breaking point came when Beverly GLen demanded that Baker record material she considered artistically inferior. Smith's vision for her career involved radio-friendly pop songs that would maximize commercial appeal at the expense of artistic integrity. For Baker, who had already sacrificed so much to get a recording contract, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. Baker's response was characteristic. She declared war. Instead of accepting Beverly GLen's commercial demands, she began looking for ways to escape her contract and regain control of her artistic destiny. The legal battle that followed would consume years of her life and establish her reputation as an artist who would fight to the death for creative control. The Beverly GLen experience taught Baker that no one in the music industry could be trusted to protect her interests. Record executives, no matter how supportive they seemed initially, would eventually try to exploit and control her. This lesson would influence every subsequent relationship she formed in the industry. When Baker finally escaped Beverly GLen and signed with Elektra Records, she thought she had found a major label that would respect her artistic vision and commercial potential. But the Beverly GLen experience had already poisoned her ability to trust business partners and created the defensive mindset that would fuel decades of industry conflicts. The legal expenses from fighting Beverly GLen also established Baker's pattern of using litigation as a primary tool for resolving business disputes. Having spent hundreds of thousands on lawyers to escape one exploitative contract, she became convinced that legal warfare was the only way to protect herself in an industry designed to destroy artists. Beverly GLen Records had intended to launch Baker's career, but instead they created a woman so traumatized by music industry exploitation that she would spend the rest of her career fighting everyone who tried to work with her.
It's an out-of-body experience. It really is. You go someplace else, and when the song is over, you come back.
The label that discovered one of soul music's greatest voices had also created one of its most dangerous adversaries. Throughout her career, Baker cycled through a series of managers and business advisors, each relationship ending in acrimony, lawsuits, or mutual destruction. These men, who were supposed to protect her interests and advance her career, instead became symbols of the industry's systemic exploitation of black female artists. The pattern was always the same. A manager would approach Baker with promises of better deals, higher profits, and greater artistic control. They would present themselves as different from the previous exploiters, claiming to understand her vision and respect her artistic integrity. Baker, desperate for representation she could trust, would enter into agreements that inevitably led to conflicts over money, control, and creative direction. B&B Associates, one of Baker's early management companies, established the template for these relationships. They positioned themselves as advocates for Baker's interests while negotiating deals that prioritized their own commissions over her long-term artistic and financial security. When Baker began questioning their decision-making and demanding greater transparency, the relationship deteriorated into public accusations and private warfare. The 2014 lawsuit filed by one of Baker's attorneys revealed the financial chaos that characterized her business relationships. Baker was sued for failing to pay legal fees, exposing a pattern of disputed contracts and unpaid obligations that followed her throughout her career.
Winning singer Anita Baker is being accused again of not paying her bills. This time it's her own lawyer who wants to drag her into court.
The attorney claimed Baker owed substantial sums for legal services, while Baker countered that the legal work had been inadequate and overpriced. Each failed management relationship reinforced Baker's belief that the music industry was designed to exploit artists, particularly black women who dared to demand respect and fair compensation. The managers who were supposed to protect her from predatory industry practices instead became part of the system that sought to control and profit from her talent. Baker's response was to assert ever greater control over her business affairs, often micromanaging decisions that would normally be delegated to experienced professionals. This hands-on approach protected her from some forms of exploitation, but also made her increasingly difficult to work with, as she questioned every contract, disputed every expense, and challenged every strategic decision. The rotating cast of managers, lawyers, and business advisors who passed through Baker's career left a trail of lawsuits, unpaid bills, and professional relationships that ended in mutual recrimination. Each departure reinforced Baker's isolation and paranoia, making her less trusting of future business partners and more likely to view every professional relationship as a potential threat. By the time Baker reached the height of her fame, she had developed a reputation as an artist who was brilliant but impossible to manage. The men who had promised to advance her career had instead taught her that survival in the music industry required constant vigilance, aggressive legal tactics, and a willingness to destroy relationships before they could destroy her. The management wars revealed the impossible position of successful black female artists in an industry controlled by white men who expected gratitude rather than equality, compliance rather than creative control, and silence rather than demands for fair treatment. In 2021, at 63 years old, Anita Baker launched her final war against the music industry, a battle that would expose the streaming economy's systematic exploitation of legacy artists and establish her as the most feared opponent of corporate music control.
Because I think about you, baby, from beginning to end.
The enemy this time wasn't a single label or manager, but the entire streaming ecosystem that had reduced her life's work to fractions of pennies per play. Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and the other platforms that dominated music consumption were paying Baker and other artists rates so low they constituted digital sharecropping. Baker's revelation of streaming economics shocked even industry insiders. She disclosed that the 2020 streaming rate paid artists between 0.3 and 0.5 of a penny per stream, essentially 1/3 to 1/2 of a single penny, before deducting fees, taxes, and other expenses. The math was devastating. Even with millions of streams, artists were earning less than they would have from selling hundreds of physical albums in previous decades. The streaming giants had accomplished what record labels had been trying to do for decades: convince artists that exposure was more valuable than compensation. They marketed streaming as democratizing music access, while creating a system that enriched platform owners and impoverished the artists whose work generated billions in revenue. Baker's boycott strategy was revolutionary. By asking fans to stop streaming her music entirely, she was rejecting the industry's fundamental assumption that artists should be grateful for any platform that exposed their work to audiences. Instead, she was demanding that streaming companies pay fair rates or lose access to her catalog entirely. The campaign exposed the racial and generational inequities built into streaming economics. While contemporary artists could supplement streaming income with touring, merchandise, and brand partnerships, legacy artists like Baker were dependent on catalog royalties that had been systematically reduced to negligible amounts. Major artists began supporting Baker's position. Bruno Mars publicly expressed his love and gratitude for her stance, signaling that even current superstars recognized the unsustainability of streaming economics for artists who had built their careers before the digital revolution. The streaming company's response revealed their contempt for artist welfare. Instead of addressing Baker's concerns about compensation rates, they relied on their monopoly power to pressure her into accepting exploitative terms. The message was clear. Artists could accept whatever rates the platforms offered or be excluded from digital music consumption entirely. Baker's victory in reclaiming her masters gave her the power to negotiate directly with streaming services rather than accepting whatever terms her former label had agreed to. This autonomy allowed her to demand better rates and more transparent accounting, establishing a template that other legacy artists could follow. The streaming war established Baker as more than a successful recording artist. She had become a labor organizer, fighting for the economic rights of all musicians. Her willingness to sacrifice short-term income to challenge systemic exploitation inspired other artists to question the sustainability of an industry that treated creators as disposable content providers. But the victory came at a huge personal cost. Baker's decades of industry warfare had isolated her from many former collaborators, damaged relationships with business partners, and established her reputation as someone too dangerous to work with. She had won the right to control her music, but lost many of the relationships that had made creating music meaningful. At 67, Anita Baker had survived every attempt by the music industry to control, exploit, or silence her. She owned her masters, controlled her legacy, and commanded respect from an industry that had spent decades trying to break her spirit. But the woman who had fought so hard to protect her artistic integrity had also become a cautionary tale about the human cost of uncompromising resistance to systemic exploitation. The men she had hated, the executives, managers, lawyers, and platform owners who had tried to profit from her genius while denying her basic rights dash, had created their most dangerous opponent. Anita Baker's war against the music industry revealed both the necessity of fighting systemic exploitation and the personal price of never backing down from a fight you know you can win. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.